and High Commissioner to Cyprus from 2005 to 2010. And early in his career, he had diplomatic postings in Venezuela, Qatar, Brussels, and Athens. So, Peter, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by sketching out very briefly how we got here, and then I'll do where we are and where we're going. Just a few dates for reference point. 2011 revolution after 42 years of Gaddafi rule, followed by elections in 2012, which elected what's called the General National Congress, and the General National Congress then appointed a government in Tripoli. 2014, there were fresh elections. The fresh elections created the House of Representatives, but that created a competing assembly and a competing government, because the House of Representatives then appointed their own government, but the GNC government didn't give way. In 2014, Haftar, and we'll come back to Haftar again during this, made his first attack on Tripoli, which didn't succeed. But you then, at that stage, you had two competing governments, two competing parliaments. The United Nations then got engaged. A man called Bernardino Leon was their special representative, and a process started, which I got involved in June 2015, which led to the Libya Political Agreement, the LPA, the Skhirat Agreement, which was signed on the 17th of December 2015 in Skhirat in Morocco. That established, first of all, a presidency council, which was nine men, 3 from the east, 3 from the west, 3 from the south. Their role was to appoint a government of national accord, second institution, the GNA, which would remove the other two governments and would bring all the governance of the country together. Third institution was the House of Representatives. The already elected in 2014 House of Representatives became the sole legislative body, and as a consolation prize for the MPs who were elected in 2012, they became the Higher State Council, which is a solely consultative council. That agreement was then endorsed by a Security Council resolution, and the Presidency Council gathered in Tunis, appointed a government of national accord, which was duly rejected by the House of Representatives. But the Presidency Council jumped on a rust bucket of a boat and came to Tripoli and began to try and establish themselves in Tripoli. Meanwhile, in Benghazi, General Haftar was tackling extremism in Benghazi. It took him a long time. He flattened most of the city. He took control of Benghazi, took control of the east, and in 2016 took control of the oil crescent, the part in the middle of the country which is the main export ports for Libya. And then in 2019, he launched his attack, 4th of April 2019, he launched his attack on Tripoli. And since then, it's been stalemate at military level and stalemate at political level. So where are we now? I think the key event in the last month has been the Berlin conference on the 19th of January, which brought together the main countries, the permanent 5 Security Council countries, Germany, Italy, Turkey, Egypt, the Emiratis, and the Arab League, the EU, and so on, to try and, first of all, call for a ceasefire in the fighting, and then endorse a new political process. That new political process has 3 main tracks. The first track is military. The situation is that General Haftar is still bogged down in the outskirts of Tripoli. He has the support of the Egyptians. He has active support from the Emiratis, quite a lot of support from Russian mercenaries, some political support from France, but he has been unable to take control of Tripoli. On the other side, you have the Government of National Accord. They are supported by a large number of Tripoli militias. Many of those militias are venal and corrupt and try to screw the government for whatever they can get. He also has the support of the Misratans, the city to about 100 miles to the east of Tripoli, who have very successful and well-trained brigades. He has the support of Turkey, active support of Turkey, who has brought in armoured personnel carriers, drones and so forth. And the most recent development is Turkey has deployed around 2,000 Syrian mercenaries to Tripoli. But the military situation is in stalemate. Since the Berlin conference, there has been a truce in and around Tripoli, but it's a truce which is very fragile. Yesterday, there were indiscriminate artillery attacks on the airport and on some of the suburbs, so it's not really holding. But in Geneva, the United Nations has brought together 5 senior military from Haftar's forces, 5 senior military from the GNA, and apparently has negotiated a ceasefire agreement. And that ceasefire agreement is now being consulted over by the senior military commanders of both Haftar and the GNA. So it's fragile. There is a ceasefire agreement in place. I am sceptical as to whether it will hold. Second main track is an economic track. The only good news and story in the last 2 years in Libya has been that oil production went up to 1.2 million barrels a day. But 2 months ago, Haftar and his tribal allies put a blockade on oil exports. Oil exports are now down to 120,000 barrels a day. So a significant drop in oil production, which means because the government and the country is totally dependent on oil revenue, the government is no longer getting any revenue coming into the central bank. The Berlin process brings together economists and economic experts to try and think through a process or a program for economic reform and restructuring in Libya. The third main track is a political track, which again brings together the government, which is recognised, the GNA and the House of Representatives, and tribal and other representatives from different parts of the country. There's supposed to be 40 representatives, 13 from the House of Representatives, 13 from the State Council. The number 13 because there are 13 large constituencies in the country, and then 14 independents. They were supposed to be meeting, and the talks are supposed to be starting today in Geneva, but the House of Representatives has refused to attend. I think the meeting is still taking place, but unless the 2 assemblies are going to be there, it's going to be fairly meaningless. What are the prospects of success? I think the political process is going to stumble along just as it did in Skhirat. It took 6 months to reach an agreement, and even then it has failed to be introduced. I think the failure of Skhirat was down to 3 main reasons, 2 of which are being tackled in the Berlin process. The first was the participation was very thin. It was only 25 Libyans. Again, it was the 2 main assemblies and a few independents, but it did not include security sector. It did not include many of the tribal leaders. The attempt of bringing these 40 people together is to try and have a much broader set of stakeholders. The second main fault of Skhirat was the coverage. It was only a political agreement. It had a few nice words about the future of the economy, had a few nice words about security, but it was not an integrated political, military and economic process, which is what the United Nations is now trying to achieve through those 3 main strands of activity. The third main fault of Skhirat was that there was no mechanism for enforcement. So the House of Representatives was supposed to endorse the government, and it had, according to the text, 10 days to endorse the government. 8 months later, they rejected that government. There has been no sanctions or any other steps taken against the House of Representatives. Equally, the countries like the Emiratis and the Egyptians and others who have actively undermined the agreement, there's no process of calling them out. They can do that with impunity. So my forecast is that there will continue to be low-level fighting in and around Tripoli and a political process that will stumble forward, that might reach an agreement in a few months' time, but will struggle to be implemented. Let me do 2 further things. What are the key obstacles here? And this, try to look at Libya as a country which was ruled by a crazy man for 42 years. And after he was a symbol of national identity, when he left the country fragmented, it was never really a unified country. It was 3 regions, Tripolitania, Kyrenaica and Fezzan. it fragmented into tribal, city, town, village identities. There is no sense of national identity which enables Libyans to negotiate and find compromise in the national interest. Second main reason for failure so far is the lack of capacity in government. Somebody said to me before I went there, the Libyans lack capacity for capacity building. And I would go to ministries. The Ministry of Planning is a good example. One very good minister, one very hard-working official, and there was nothing underneath it. So if you could reach some sort of agreement with the minister, you soon realize there was nothing underneath that minister who could actually achieve or deliver very much in terms of results. It's one of the key legacies of Gaddafi is that he hollowed out the key government institutions. Third main obstacle to progress is what I would call the status quo party. Those members of parliament in the House of Representatives and the State Council are very comfortable. They've got nice salaries, they get diplomatic passports and so forth. They don't want a new process that would lead to elections that would probably lead to them losing their seats. Many of the other militias in Tripoli are very comfortable. They've got their grip on the finance of the country, on the central bank and others. They fear repercussions if there were to be a peace process. Fourth main reason is divisions with the international community. We've seen the Egyptians, the Emiratis on one side, the Turks on the other, the Russians getting engaged through their mercenaries, the French trying to play both sides, the Americans with Trump actually phoned Haftar shortly after his attack on Tripoli. They seem to be backing both sides. Divisions, and I think the international community came together in 2015. It has since then divided into backing different sides. Another reason for failure, I think, is Haftar himself. I met him 5 times in 2017. He believes that he can win. He believes that security and military power comes first and politics can come later. I frankly believe that he cannot take Tripoli without flattening the city. I think there's too much resistance. Too many people who said we had a military dictator for 42 years. The last thing we need is another one. And the conditions he's set for the ceasefire, which is basically that the Turks leave the country, is not going to happen. The last reason I would say is a lack of trust, a lack of accountability, and total impunity for those who undermine both at international level and at local level. I think unless you can build more trust between politicians and between Libyans working on behalf of some sort of national purpose, I think you will struggle to make much progress. The other strand of what I was going to say is the UK role. I think we were strongly involved in the Skhirat agreement and in the follow-up to the Skhirat agreement. Our main objectives then was to deal with terrorism. The 30-odd British tourists who were killed in Sousse in 2015, that terrorist was trained in Libya. The attack on the Bardo Museum a little bit earlier in Tunis, that terrorist was trained in Libya. Of course, the Manchester bomber himself and his brother were of Libyan origin. So trying to stamp out Daesh and stamp out terrorism is clearly in the UK interest. Migration. Not a lot of the migrants who have been crossing the Mediterranean have come to the UK, but I think it is clearly a major humanitarian crisis there. But what we need to deal with those issues is a stable government. I think in 2011, we were strongly involved in bringing about the fall of Gaddafi. I think we have a responsibility to try and bring stability back to that country. And if we want to deal with terrorism and migration, we need a stable and capable government that we can help. We were always seen as a neutral, constructive and helpful player. We are the pen holder at the Security Council. I was always welcomed in the East as well as in the West. I was able to see Haftar. I even took the then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson to see Haftar in August 2017. We were seen as a country that could play a role and that could play a role in influencing both sides. I would say what I would like to see in the coming months is a more active and visible role by ministers and by Parliament in engaging on Libyan issues. I think we can play a role in pressing the political process to a successful conclusion. can play a role in economic reform. The Libya Investment Authority, for example, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is working through 5 or 6 London-based London-based companies to put its governance in order. Central bank, the currency is printed by Delarue. We have a lot of commercial interests in the economy, and we can help a lot there. But I think also on the military side, nobody wants to deploy or Libyans being trained in the UK again, as happened in Bassingbourn in 2014 and 15. But I think in military training, DDR, the process of taking the militia boys back into and reintegrating, demobilizing them, disarming them, and reintegrating them into the economy. The UK can play a strong role in giving the training necessary to achieve that to happen. Unless there is a DDR process, there won't be a successful political process. So the UK can play, as I say, a more active and visible role in doing that. I think as far as Parliament is concerned, once all the committees are sorted out, an all-party parliamentary group on Libya would be an extremely positive step. And a new trade envoy. Henry Bellingham was trade envoy for very active for a while. A new trade envoy would also be a very positive demonstration of UK support for Libya. There we are.
Thank you very much.
I hope that covered a lot of ground.
Thank you.